All right, my clock shows 10 o'clock. Let's get started here. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar covering nonprofit board responsibilities. For our new viewers, I want to take a moment to introduce everyone here on the nonprofit team at DWD. My name is Tyson Moore. I'm a supervisor here. Also joining us is Director Phil McKenzie, Senior Audrey Sadison, and presenter and partner Carrie Minnick. Just as a reminder, so this webinar is live. It's interactive. So as Carrie goes through her presentation, the rest of us will answer questions via the chat. So for those of you who have questions during the webinar, use the question and answer feature. You should see that at the bottom of your screen in a toolbar. Also, today's slides, they're going to be emailed out to everyone who attended the presentation once we're finished. Today's topic is board responsibilities, and serving on a board, it's a great way to give back to the community, but it can really be hard to know where you fit in as a board member. So I joined my first board without really understanding the roles and responsibilities that I was accepting at the time. So I remember my first board meeting, I walked in and it was a room full of business leaders, and I felt really out of place there. And there was agendas, and there was Robert's rules and voting, and people were throwing out motions, and I was just trying to keep up at the time. It was an hour-and-a-half meeting. It felt like about 15 minutes. It was just a blur of a meeting. So it took me about a year as a board member to truly understand all of the responsibilities that I had as a board member. Today's webinar will hopefully reduce that initial learning curve by covering some of the responsibilities that you're going to accept when you choose to join a board. So we have a lot to cover here. I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to get us started.
Thanks, Tyson, and thank you all for attending today. Before we talk about board responsibilities, it's important to understand the basics of how nonprofits operate. And when we say nonprofit or not-for-profit, some people automatically think that the organization cannot and should not make a profit. So whenever I do these, I really like to start off by saying that that is incorrect. We just need to understand the basics of nonprofits, and that does not mean that they cannot and should not make a profit. Of course, they have to make more money than they spend. Otherwise, the organization would not be able to succeed. It wouldn't be able to be in existence. So the term nonprofit and not-for-profit really isn't the best terminology for our organizations. But I just wanted to start off with that. Other things that we like to talk about related to nonprofits is mission driven. Nonprofits exist to serve a public benefit, not to make a profit. They don't exist to just focus on making a profit, but they do have to make a profit to be sustainable. Every decision that nonprofits make, including yours as a board member, should reflect the mission. We always want to keep the mission in mind, forefront. Nonprofits also have a tax-exempt status. So most nonprofits are 501c3 organizations. Now, there are several other different types of tax-exempt entities with the IRS. Most people are familiar with the 501c3 organizations, the charitable, educational, scientific organizations, Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Ronald McDonald House. Those types of organizations are all 501c3 organizations. 501c3 organizations, when an individual makes a donation to these types of entities, they can receive a charitable donation. But the organization has to comply with IRS rules to make sure that they keep that status. Speaking of contributions, funding sources are different for nonprofits than from for-profits. Nonprofits rely heavily on donations, grants, fundraising events, like the special events, the dinners that they have. They do have some nonprofits can have some program fees where they are providing a service and they charge a fee. And then also some organizations have government contracts. So normally nonprofits get a wide variety of revenue. Now, there are some nonprofits that rely strictly on just contributions, or some that rely strictly on program service fees. However, most organizations do receive a combination of those types of revenue. Nonprofits also have to follow transparency rules. The biggest thing is Form 990 that needs to be filed annually with the IRS. So this is not a tax return. It is an informational return. Unlike a for-profit tax return, Form 990 asks information above and beyond just numbers. So yes, we do report financial numbers on Form 990, but it also asks a lot of information about your board, who is on your board, if you have different types of policies and procedures in place. It talks about what you accomplished during the year, your programming. So not only does it talk about financials, but it really goes beyond that and talks about the governance of the organization and how that works. In addition, this IRS Form 990 is open to public inspection. So your form for your organization that's filed each year, anybody can go out and access that on the IRS website. If someone comes to your organization and asks for a copy of your Form 990, you do have to supply that as well. It is required. So that is something different that a nonprofit has to follow versus a for-profit. And then also just volunteer leadership. Nonprofits usually rely heavily on volunteers. Now, most nonprofits do have a paid staff. However, there's some very small organizations that rely 100% of volunteers. And most organizations rely on some type of volunteers within the organization, either to help them do programming and provide services, or just their boards. Most nonprofit boards are volunteer, they're not paid. However, there are some organizations that do pay their boards, but most nonprofit board members, it is a volunteer position. So that's kind of just some basics of how nonprofits operate. Some of these things are a little different than your typical for-profit entity. Now, the IRS, they redesigned Form 990, which I've just mentioned was the annual return that all nonprofits have to file with the IRS in 2018. When they revamped this form, there was a large focus on governance. They called it the crown jewel section of the Form 990. They really want to know about the organization's board and how it operates. This is because the IRS believes that a well-governed organization is more likely to obey tax rules, be more, serve charitable interests better, safeguard the assets of the organization. They also believe that the board should be active and engaged. And so that's why it's so important to understand your responsibilities as a board member. So that way your organization can be successful, but also meet those requirements that the IRS has out there for tax exempt organizations. So if we start at the beginning, before you even join a board, before you say yes, we really should ask some questions about the organization. You want to know what you're getting yourself into. So consider asking some questions before even joining the board. So you really want to understand what the organization's mission is. There are all different kinds of nonprofits out there. Some focus on children, some focus on animals, some focus on the environment. So you want to find an organization that you have a passion for. There are some organizations that I've asked to be on the board and I have declined because it's just not, they're doing good work, but it's just not something that I am passionate about. So you want to make sure that what the organization does is something that you're interested in, because you are going to be giving your time, talent, and treasure to this organization. So you want to make sure it's a good fit. You also want to have an understanding of their financials. I mentioned that the IRS Form 990 is available for public inspection. So you can go out on the internet and look up the organization's Form 990. If you can't find it for some reason, you can ask them for a copy. There's a lot of information that you can find out about the organization on its Form 990. Like I said, it goes beyond just the financial information. You can see who's on the board. You can see what policies and procedures they have in place. You can there's a lot of information out there on the Form 990. So I would highly suggest getting a copy of that so you can take a look at it beforehand. You want to find out if the board is active and engaged, or is it more of a ceremonial board? Some boards are very involved in day-to-day operations. Smaller organizations that may not have a full staff, maybe they don't have a fundraising person, some of that may fall onto the board of directors, whereas larger boards or larger organizations that have been in existence for a long time probably have a full set of employees. So all the positions are filled, and the board is more of a higher level review type board. So there are different types of boards out there. So that's one thing to ask as well. You know, how active is the board? And a lot of times it will vary based on the size of the organization and how long the organization has been in place. The new, younger organizations that haven't been around a long time probably have a more active board because they're probably still setting up programs, getting things in line. Organizations that have been around a long time or longer time than others, they probably have more of an oversight board where things have already been in place, everything has been set up, and they kind of got everything going. Now, there are instances where nonprofits go through different life cycles. And so an organization who has been around for a very long time and maybe did have a more of an oversight board could be going through some changes. And as a result, their board might have to be more active in the day-to-day operations. So you want to ask and find out, you know, what level the organization's board is currently. You want to find out how often the board meets. What's the commitment? So most boards will meet monthly and then they'll take July and December off. However, there are some organizations that meet every other month. Some organizations meet quarterly. It really just depends. There's no rule or law that says the certain number of times that a board has to meet, but you're going to want to find out how often they meet because this again is a time commitment. One thing about being a board member is showing up for meetings. So you want to make sure that you know when those meetings are. And also, you know, is it a 2-hour meeting? Is it a 1-hour meeting? Is it during the day? Is it in the evening? Is it in the morning? So you want to make sure that the meeting times fit your schedule. You want to find out if there's directors and officers insurance in place. So this is the type of insurance that protects board members. If someone were to come in and challenge a decision that the board made, and maybe saying that, hey, the board made this decision and it really wasn't in the best interest of the organization. Most organizations do have D&O insurance. It's not necessarily a requirement, but it is a best practice and the organization should have that in place. And then the final question that I have on here is, will I be expected to donate or fundraise, and how much? So when you join a board, most organizations do expect board members to contribute something to the organization. And here's the reason why. Because if your board does not contribute to your organization, how can you expect other outside people, individuals, funders to give to your organization? So oftentimes organizations strive for 100% board giving, which means that every board member has given something. Now, some organizations will have a specific dollar amount requirement. So every board member is expected to give X dollars. However, I think most organizations these days just ask that all board members give something and that it's a significant amount to the board member. So then they let that board member decide what it is. So making sure you understand those types of requirements before you join the board. So board members have 3 core legal duties. And these are across all types of organizations. The first is the duty of care. So what this means is that you need to make informed decisions when you are acting as a board member. So that means you need to be prepared when you're going into the meetings. Oftentimes, you're going to get a board packet prior to your meeting date. Hopefully, this is given in advance, far enough in advance, so you have ample time to review it and understand what's going on. So that way, when you're at the meetings, you have that background that needs to be understood in order to make informed decisions. Duty of loyalty means putting the organization's interests above your own. So sometimes there could be some type of conflict of interest between a board member and the organization. So for example, let's say a board member, their spouse owns an advertising company, and this organization uses that advertising company for their advertising. That is completely fine. If that relationship has been disclosed. The risk there is that that board member's spouse, because of the relationship of the spouse being on the board, is receiving some kind of benefit from that relationship. So as long as you disclose this relationship and everyone is aware of it, that's perfectly fine. Oftentimes nonprofits will have a conflict of interest statement that they require all their board members to sign at the end of each year, at the beginning of each year, that would disclose any possible conflict of interest such as this. And then normally that board member refrains from voting on any type of transaction with that related party. But again, related parties are fine. It's just it needs to be completely disclosed, documented, and handled properly. The final legal responsibility is duty of obedience. And this is ensuring that the organization follows all of the laws and operates according to its mission and governing documents. So as I mentioned before, there is an annual Form 990 that the organizations have to file with the IRS, kind of like their tax return, except for it's an informational return. So making sure that that's filed annually. An organization will have a mission statement, which basically says this is, our purpose, making sure that everything that we do follows that mission. And an organization will also have bylaws, and bylaws are basically your internal rules. So making sure that you understand what those bylaws say and that the organization is following that. For example, some organizations' bylaws say that an organization is required to have an annual audit. So if your bylaws say that, you want to make sure that that is being followed, that you are following what your bylaws state. So as a fiduciary, you're legally responsible for help safeguarding the nonprofit's resources and reputation. So these are really what these three legal responsibilities of board members is what that's focusing on. There's also the possibility, if you don't follow these as a board, there could be consequences of neglect, loss of public trust, fines, or even loss of tax exempt status. So we really want to make sure that we understand our duties as board members and making sure that we're following them. So as a board member, what do you actually do? So let's talk about more of the practical side. What do board members actually do? So each board is going to be a little bit different because all organizations are different. However, there are some common expectations that all boards have. A nonprofit board job isn't just to sit there and attend meetings. You are responsible for steering the organization strategically, safeguarding its resources, and ensuring it fulfills its mission with integrity and impact. So it's again, normally it's a volunteer capacity. However, it's a very serious one, and you are leading the organization. So first item I like to talk about is set and uphold the mission. So again, everything aligns with the mission. We always follow the mission. Again, the mission is basically what is your organization in existence to do? What is its purpose? So as board members, we want to make sure that all of our programs, services, everything we do aligns with the mission. You as a board member should be able to clearly articulate what the mission is to other people when you're out talking about the organization to your friends, family, community members, colleagues. We want to make sure that we avoid mission creep. So that is where we start to kind of stray away from what our mission is. So when an organization is initially started, you have to the board has to approve a mission statement. So it's good to go back to that mission statement every so often and evaluate it, review it, and make sure, hey, is this really what we're still doing? Because this mission statement is part of what the IRS approved our tax exempt status to be. And so we want to make sure that we don't stray too far from that mission. Sometimes mission creep happens when an organization has the opportunity to get funding from new sources or new grants that it may not have gotten in the past. So for example, hey, this foundation is giving away grants for XYZ program. well, my nonprofit has never done XYZ program before, but hey, this is some more money that we can get. So we're going to consider going and getting this XYZ grant. Well, that's not always the best opportunity and best choice for the organization because that's not really part of our mission. And there's a whole bunch of other things that may come up with that as well. But just making sure, again, that everything that we do, any new opportunities, just strategically, that we're always focused on what the mission is. Next is hiring, supporting, and evaluating the ED. So whether you call the person your executive director, your CEO, your president, this is the person that's been hired to operate the daily, to be in charge of the daily operations of the organization. One of the most important responsibilities is making sure that you have the proper person in place in this position. So some organizations need an executive director that has experience in programming. So where the organization is at this time, they really need to have somebody in there that knows programming, that understands programming, and that can focus on that. Other organizations may need to have an executive director that is more focused on fundraising, that has more experience in fundraising. So you need to understand where your organization is at and what kind of person, what kind of skills and leadership is right for your organization at this point in time. Beyond that, you need to make sure that there's a written job description that includes what this what the expectations, responsibilities are for the individual, and then also providing an annual review to make sure that the individual is following those expectations. There's different ways to do a performance review, but really we need to make sure that one is being done. So that way we can make sure that the individual that we've hired to run the daily operations is guiding the organization in the correct manner. Sometimes there is some confusion between the roles of board members and the executive director. So we want to make sure that we're not micromanaging our executive director. The board has one employee, the executive director. The executive director is then in charge of everyone else that is hired within the organization and the daily operations. So that's one area that sometimes boards can overstep. So we want to make sure we understand the clear line between executive director responsibilities and also board member responsibilities. So part of hiring and evaluating the executive director is determining their compensation. The IRS is very, very big on making sure that executive directors are paid reasonable compensation and that they are not paid in excess. Now, in Indiana, this usually isn't a big issue. However, it could be. And so we want to make sure that we are not only reviewing the executive director's performance, but also their salary, as well as any benefits that are paid to them. So this should really be done annually, and it should also be documented and approved as such. So when we do that, we want to make sure we are documenting how we're determining how the executive director is being paid. Are we looking at other nonprofit organizations that do similar activities, that are similar in size, that are in similar location, to see how much they're paying their executive directors, and then looking at some comparable benefits and salaries in that way? Or how are we coming up with this salary? We need to make sure that we document that, because that does lie on the organization to make sure that we are showing and proving that the compensation is reasonable. Another responsibility that board members have is providing financial oversight. Now, I know that not all of you are accountants or CPAs, and that is perfectly fine. We do not want a board full of accountants. That would just not be good. However, as board member, you are responsible for understanding your organization's financials. So if that is an area that maybe you feel you're not as comfortable with as some areas, ask. Ask to meet with the treasurer, ask to meet with the CFO, ask for if you have an audit done, ask for your auditor to come in and do a presentation to the board. We really need to have an understanding as board members what our financials mean. We are responsible for the financials of the organization. You need to understand, where's our money coming from? What are we using it for? What trends are there? How does it compare to budget? We really need to have an understanding for that because we need to make sure that we are providing the appropriate resources to be sustainable. And are we doing our proper fiduciary duties with stewarding the donors' dollars? We do a bi-weekly blog, and today is actually, today's post is 10 questions to ask before approving your budget. So, as board members, we have to go in and approve the budget. The staff usually prepare the budget, but it is the responsibility of the board to review and approve it. So if you want some additional information, you can go check out that blog and look at some questions maybe to ask. Also, throughout the year after you approve that budget, you want to make sure that you're comparing the budget to actuals because a budget is a roadmap. We shouldn't just create it and put it on the shelf. We really need to make sure that we're using it to make sure that we're getting to where we need to be throughout the year. We also need to ensure that proper internal controls are in place. Risk management practices are in place. Now, we as board members don't usually actually implement the internal controls. With smaller organizations, though, the board treasurer might be part of that internal control process. But we as board members need to make sure that there are policies and procedures in place to ensure proper controls, risk management, that type of thing. We also need to ensure appropriate audits or reviews are done if required. So there are different reasons why your organization would need to have an audit done. If you expend more than $750,000 in government funding, that does increase to $1 million here shortly. But if you have expended more than $750,000 in federal funding, you have to have a special kind of audit done, a single audit. In Indiana, there is what's called an annual E1 form that's filed with the State Board of Accounts. That is for any nonprofit that receives any type of government support in Indiana. Like if you're an Indiana nonprofit and you receive government support, you have to file this E1 with the State Board of Accounts. They might come back and require you to have an audit done. You might have funders that require you to have an audit done or a review. You may have a bank that requires you to have an audit done for a loan, or your bylaws might require you to have an audit done or a review. So you need to make sure that you understand what requirements are in place should you have to have an audit or review done, and make sure that that is getting done appropriately. Next, fundraising and resource development. So I mentioned that most organizations do require their board members to give something. That's kind of just an expectation. Obviously, if you're passionate about what the organization does, that shouldn't be difficult to do. Now, board members are also sometimes expected to support fundraising efforts. So a lot of times board members don't necessarily like to do this aspect of the job. However, there are some things that can make it easier. For example, if you're making a personal financial contribution, other people might see that and say, okay, hey, they're supporting this organization. It's probably a pretty good organization. I'm going to support it too. Helping identify other donors, other grant opportunities. If you hear of different sources of revenue, sharing that. Attending fundraising events that the organization has, inviting your friends and family to attend fundraising events, and introducing the executive director to different organizations, different people in the community, just taking an active role in communicating out what the organization does to those that you run into and that those you meet every day. Again, many funders and donors do expect a 100% board giving before they'll contribute, because again, why should I give to your organization if your board doesn't even give to your organization? So there is that fundraising aspect. Most oftentimes, nonprofits do have an internal fundraising person that actually goes out and does the fundraising, but the board is there to just, again, support those fundraising efforts to make sure that there's adequate financial resources in place in order for the organization to do what it does. The next is strategic planning. So it used to be back in the day that 5-year strategic plans were all the rage. That's what we did. Well, then COVID happened and the world just changes faster and faster. So most organizations have a shorter period, 2 or 3 year plans kind of have become the norm, maybe even 1 to 2 years, just because of all of the change. And especially recently with the government cuts, we have to understand what's going on and how that's going to impact our future. As a board member, we need to actively participate in strategic planning. Again, the executive director and staff are the ones that carry out the strategic planning steps and goals. However, we need to make sure as board members that there's a strategic plan in place. And we also need to make sure that we understand where we're at. Are we making those measurable progress towards our mission? Where do we need to work on? What do we need to focus on? And also making sure that the strategic plan, the budget, and the mission all go together, that they're all going on one path moving forward. As part of that strategic planning process, in order to do it effectively, we as board members really need to understand the key trends and challenges that are specific to our organization. So for example, if you're an organization that normally receives some government funding, we need to understand that the government has cut a lot of that funding back. So how is that going to impact us? Or if you're an organization that focuses on some type of education, what's going on in that education realm? What kind of things are impacting the world that our nonprofit operates in? Ensuring legal and ethical integrity. This kind of goes along with some of those legal responsibilities, those 3 legal responsibilities that we initially talked about. But again, making sure that the organization complies with any kind of state laws and regulations, making sure that the 990 is filed, making sure that if there's other type of reporting that needs to be done. For example, that E1, if you're an Indiana organization that receives government funding, making sure that that's filed. If you're an organization that's related to like a national organization, so for example, like a YMCA, are there specific requirements or reporting that your organization has to provide to the national organization? What is the timeline? What are the requirements for those? Also making sure that there are key policies in place. A conflict of interest policy, a whistleblower policy, and document retention and destruction policy are certain policies that actually are required for nonprofits to have. There are a lot of policies that are more considered best practices. However, these really are required for all nonprofits to have. So if you don't have these policies in place, I would strongly recommend that you consider putting them in place. If you need a copy or a template to start with, just let us know. We'd be happy to provide those to you. And then again, we talked a little bit about audits, making sure that if you do need to have an audit, making sure that that is done timely and appropriately to meet those requirements. Next is policy setting and risk management. So again, we just talked about those 3 policies that are required. There's many other, policies that are considered best practices. There's policies related to internal controls, making sure that the organization has those policies in place. Now, some organizations don't necessarily have the board approve all policies. It just depends on how your organization is set up. The executive committee or board governance committee might be approving those policies depending, or HR committee might be approving those policies depending on the type of policies. But as a board member, you should really know whether those types of policies are in place. Also, risk management. That's something that the board should take an active role in. And when we talk about risk management, it's really, when we talk about risk, it's anything that's going to impact your organization that's going to prevent you from doing what you do. So, there's cybersecurity risks, COVID, that happened. So that really, took a hit on how we were operating. Financial, legal, there's all kinds of risks. So as a board, you should really discuss that. What kind of things could occur? What risks could happen that would impact your organization's ability to perform its services and programs? And then what can we do to mitigate those risks? I think one of the biggest risks related to nonprofits is reputational risk, what people think about your organization. I always recommend people to go out there and Google your organization and see what comes up. What are people saying about your organization? Because if an organization takes a hit to their reputation, that's really difficult to recover from. You're probably going to lose volunteers, you're going to lose board members. It's going to be harder to get donations. So that's a big one that people might not always think about. So again, risk management, it's not about just avoiding the problem, because risks happen, they occur. It's what are we going to do to be prepared for when that happens? And again, as board members, we are ultimately responsible for the organization. So we need to make sure that we are discussing these items and preparing for them. Next is acting as ambassadors. So board members really represent the organization in the community. So when you're out there going to work, going to church, going to your kids' school, doing whatever you do, you're really representing that organization to everyone in the community. So just taking the opportunity to share what the organization does with your friends, families, colleagues, people you meet. Oftentimes, personal stories make an impact. People remember them, what your organization does. Some board members may also engage in public policy or advocacy, depending on the organization's mission. And I just wanted to take a minute to kind of talk about what advocacy is. So there's kind of three different types of things that go along with this area. We have advocacy, we have lobbying, and we have political activity. So advocacy is really about education. So we're educating people on how policies affect our organization, which is fine. That is what you should do. That's what all nonprofits should do. Then we have lobbying, kind of the next step up. Lobbying is where we're intending to influence legislations. Now, 501c3 organizations cannot engage in substantial lobbying. There's actually rules, laws, the IRS says that as a 501c3 organization, you cannot engage in substantial lobbying. You can engage in a small amount of lobbying, but not a substantial amount. And then there's political activity. Political activity is activity that supports or opposes a candidate for a public office. This is completely not allowed. 501c3 organizations are not allowed in order to be active in any kind of political activity. If you do so, it may result in the loss of your tax exempt status. And when I say nonprofit organizations, I also mean board members. So obviously board members can be political personally, but we don't want to say, hi, I am Mary Smith, and as a board member of ABC organization, I support candidate A. We don't want to say that. So we just want to make sure that we understand what we can and cannot do when we're getting into that area of political lobbying and advocacy, making sure that our board members are clearly aware of what they can and cannot do, because obviously we don't want to take a hit to our reputation or take a chance of loss of exempt status. Next is participate in board development. So oftentimes it falls on the executive director to recruit new board members. It is not the executive director's responsibility to recruit board members. It is the board's. Usually there is a governance committee that's in charge of recruiting new board members. But the big thing there is it is the board that needs to make sure that we have adequate people on our board to oversee the organization. When we're looking to bring on new board members, we need to look to see what kind of skills, diversity, perspective do we need. We don't want everyone to be of the same mindset. We don't want everyone to work at the same organization. We don't want everyone to be of the same family. Again, the IRS believes that a more diverse board is better for the organization. And again, when we say diverse, we're not just looking at people's skin color. We're looking at where they're from, what they do. We're looking at the different ideas that they have, the different experiences that they have. So we want to make sure that we have a well-diverse, well-experienced, representing different areas of people on our board. As a board member, we also need to evaluate ourselves. Individually, what am I doing as a board member? Where could I improve? And also as a whole. So oftentimes boards will do an annual board evaluation where they will evaluate the board as a whole, how they have done during the year, but then also individually as a board member, what have you contributed? How can you improve? That type of thing. A lot of times organizations will talk about succession planning in relation to the CEO or the executive director. We also need to think about succession planning within our board. Who is going to be the board chair next? Who's going to fall into the vice chair, the secretary, the treasurer, those officer positions? And then also who is going to fill those different spots when someone's term limits come up. So again, your board are leaders of your organization. So you want to make sure you have the proper people in place. So thinking about not only succession planning for your executive director, but also for your board when you think about that kind of stuff. A lot of times boards will have a board matrix, and it will list all of the individuals who are currently serving on the board, and then it will have different skills. So like this person has an accounting background, this person has a marketing background, this person has a legal knowledge, this person has a lot of friends in high places. So then we can kind of put together this matrix and see, okay, where are we missing? Well, we do a lot with education. So we really would like to have somebody maybe from the local school system, maybe from the administration or a teacher. So we really need that spot in here. So having some kind of board matrix will allow you to see where the holes are and what you need to fill in those areas. So those are kind of some responsibilities, obviously not all inclusive, but those are some of the basic responsibilities of nonprofit board members. So what makes an effective board member? Well, first of all, showing up, both physically and mentally. So again, making sure that you show up to those board meetings. As I said, some boards only meet quarterly. So if you miss one meeting, that's a big chunk of information that you're missing. Most boards also have an attendance requirement. So they really want you to be at a certain percentage of board meetings, whether it's 80% or 75%, whatever it is. So that's really an expectation that you show up and are there, prepared, ready. Again, oftentimes there will be a board packet that is sent out with an agenda, the minutes of last meeting, maybe some financials, maybe some committee reports. Make sure you read those. There's a lot of information in there. There's a reason they're sending these to you. Read the minutes. You're going to have to approve those in the meetings. Make sure that they are what really happened. If there's changes that need to be made, talk about those changes, but make sure that that accurately reflects what the discussions were. Give generously, again, time, talent, and treasure. Avoid micromanaging, understand what your responsibility is, but then also make sure you really understand what the organization is and the mission, making sure you understand your place, how you can help the organization be effective. Remember, you as a board member are a steward of the mission. So some things to avoid. Sometimes boards struggle, let's just be honest. So there are some red flags. So if these come up, you might want to have a heart-to-heart. Low engagement or poor attendance. So if you can't get a quorum at a board meeting, that's not good. So that means you can't get enough people to actually take a vote. That's really not good. So you really need to have a discussion as to why are people not showing up? Are they not interested anymore? Is it the time of when the meeting is? What is causing this? Because in order to be successful, you really need to have all your board members at the meetings. Rubber stamping decisions without understanding them. So oftentimes emotion will come up and everyone just says, yep, I'm good with that. Well, that's great, but have you really considered it? Do you understand what you're approving? We just don't want to rubber stamp all of our decisions without having a conversation and discussion. It's much better for discussions and maybe disagreements to come up within the organization, and then you can discuss it and come to a conclusion before it goes outside of the organization. So we want to make sure that we're talking about everything that could occur, that we're, having those discussions internally before we vote on things, so it doesn't come up outside of the boardroom. Conflicts of interest, we talked about that, making sure you have a conflict of interest that's signed every year, making sure those are disclosed. Term limits. Okay, let's talk about term limits for a minute. Most organizations do have term limits. Oftentimes, it's a 3-year term to serve on the board. Then you can be renewed for another 3 years, but then you have to take a year off before you could consider coming back. Now, some organizations do not have term limits. Once you're on, you may have to be approved every 3 years, but it's just kind of assumed that you're going to be on the board until you're done. There are pros and cons to having term limits and not having term limits. If you don't have term limits, it gets new blood in there, new ideas. It forces people to move on and bring in new people. So you kind of have, people don't get burned out as much. You bring in the new people, you get new ideas. On the other side, though, if you don't have term limits and you have a really good board member and you don't want to lose them, you get to keep them so they don't have to roll off. So there are pros and cons to term limits and not term limits. So that is one thing you want to make sure you understand when you do join a board or thinking about joining a board, is what are the term limits. The pitfall here is that when we don't have term limits and we're just kind of stuck in the status quo and we're not getting new ideas in there and we're just kind of stuck in a rut. So I'm not saying that you can't have term limits or you shouldn't have that you should have term limits. It's just making sure that you don't get stuck and that there are new ways of thinking and that type of thing. And finally, lack of financial literacy among board members. Again, you don't have to have a board full of accountants or CPAs, but everybody needs to understand your organization's accounting and what it means in order to make the organization successful moving on. So just, watch out for these red flags. These issues can really weaken an organization. So we just want to be aware of, when this step comes up, what can we do? So board service is a meaningful way to support causes you care about, but it comes with serious responsibility. So as you move forward, think about a couple of things. Ask good questions. If you have a question, more than likely someone else on the board has the exact same question. Stay mission focused, know what your mission is, make sure everything that you do follows your mission. Understand your role. As a board member, what are the expectations? Attend board training. So if your organization has onboarding of new board members, usually if there's annual type of board education, or in your community, there's different types of board education available, take advantage of those. And then also, if you're not on a board yet, but you're thinking about joining a board, consider joining a committee first. And that's how a lot of boards work. They really want an individual to join a committee first before joining the board. So it's kind of like dating. You date somebody first and then you ask them to marry them. So it kind of gives you an opportunity for each person, each side, the board, the nonprofit, and the individual to get to know each other to see if it's a good fit. Because you might get in there and say, oh, this is not what I thought was going on here. And so this kind of gives you an opportunity to not make that full-on commitment for board service, but to actually, commit to a committee first. It also gives you an opportunity to get to know the organization and how it works first. So I would really encourage people to join a committee first before joining a board. I did want to leave you, we have a few minutes left, but I wanted to leave you with some resources. So if you're not familiar with BoardSource, I would highly encourage you to go out and visit their website. It's boardsource.org. They have a whole bunch of information for nonprofit board service and governance. And one of their top resources that I think they have are the 10 basic responsibilities of nonprofit boards. So there's this book. And I've listed what the 10 basic, what they say the 10 basic responsibilities are here on the slide. And we've really talked about a lot of those today. So if you're looking for more resources, getting a better understanding of what a board member does, or maybe some board training for your organization, I would highly recommend going out and visiting BoardSource. There is a membership fee that you can pay to access certain resources, but there's also a lot of free stuff out there, so you don't necessarily need to pay to access some of those resources. We talked briefly about executive director compensation. So the best way to determine what you should pay your executive director or CEO is comparable data. There's a Northeast Indiana nonprofit salary survey that's done every year. And you can go out to this website and access this. This is the most recent one that they've done, 2022. There's one done every 2 or 3 years. So there's one for Northeast Indiana. There's also one for Central Indiana, the last one that was done here in 2023. So if you're looking for some information on salaries, not only for your executive director, but maybe for some other people within your organization, those are good resources because those actually are data from Indiana, Central Indiana and Northeast Indiana. So I would recommend those. Also the IRS website. So if you go to the IRS website, irs.gov, and then go to charities and nonprofits, you can search for organizations. So any entity, any tax exempt entity that is registered with the IRS, you can go out and look them up by their name or their EIN. And you can pull up their 990. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when you are searching by the organization's name, you have to put in the name, like the legal name. So some organizations maybe go by a DBA, so you have to make sure you know what the legal name of the organization is. You can put that in here and you can pull up their Form 990 to see all kinds of information, again, that's on the 990, and you can also make sure that they are a legit organization that's registered with the IRS. Keep in mind that religious organizations don't necessarily always have to be registered with the IRS. So if you're looking for a church or a religious organization, they may not be on here. That doesn't mean they're not a real organization. It just means that they are not registered with the IRS. Another source to look up for 990s is Candid. This used to be GuideStar. So you can go out and again, look up organizations by name or EIN to look up their 990. Again, if you are interested in any type of nonprofit, joining a nonprofit board or looking for resources as far as, salaries, benefits of other organizations, I would highly recommend going to look up the organization's 990. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at organizations 990s, sometimes 990s aren't always completed correctly, but this is a good source to start your research. And you can always reach out to the organization as well for additional questions. So I just wanted to share those resources with you. DWD, our firm, also has a few other resources. You can visit our website here. We're currently doing webinars every other month specific to nonprofits. So you can go out and register for those. Those are completely free. You just need to register for those to get the Zoom link. And so you can see our next 3 webinars coming up here. We also have a mission-minded nonprofit blog that has a lot of information for different types of nonprofit specific topics, whether it be board service, accounting, Form 990, all types of things. We provide that as well. So I just wanted to thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about nonprofit board governance, or if you have other questions about your nonprofit, please feel free to reach out to us. The slide at the beginning had all of our team members. These slides will be mailed out to all of you after the presentation is over. So I just want to thank you again for your time and for your commitment